History can do without one man. Who am I that I can't just kind of throw away my life on this quest to write one perfect sentence? Once you can face your mortality, you realize, I really have nothing to lose. So why don't I do the one thing I dream of doing? And that is creating something that transcends not just my experience, but really connects with a lot of people.
I remember looking up from the book and looking around and almost feeling like, I hope no one knows what I'm reading or thinking right now.
There are a lot of accounts of people who've been reading that particular story, and they fainted on subway platforms, or they fainted sitting in public transport. I am always trying to recreate the kind of strength that stories had when I was a child, stories that you would hear around a campfire, stories that would sort of completely terrify you and overwhelm you. And so anytime a short story can have any kind of a strong effect like that, whether it's people passing out or people weeping, I love to see 20-something people start to cry, especially if they're young men. That's the kind of huge effect that I think stories can have, and completely reaffirms my choice to be a writer.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Chuck Palahniuk, the American best-selling novelist and journalist, best known for writing Fight Club and Choke. Over the past 24 years, you published 23 best-selling books, including 17 novels, a collection of essays, a travel guide, 2 coloring books, and a personal memoir. Your 1996 book, Fight Club, was adapted into the Hollywood blockbuster movie starring Brad Pitt and Edward Norton, which the New York Times called the defining cult movie of our time. In 2005, during a live reading of your horror story Guts, 67 people fainted due to graphic content, and today you continue to push the boundaries of storytelling. Your latest book, The Invention of Sound, is the chilling tale of a father searching for his missing daughter and has been described as, quote, your most suspenseful, daring, and genre-defining work yet. Chuck, welcome to London Real.
Hey, thank you very much. Wow. Just to correct, it wasn't 60. I've never had 63 people faint at one event. The most I've ever had is 8 people. And that was in Brighton, England, at the Brighton Fringe Festival.
Do English people faint more often than Americans?
No, it was just that it was such a vast crowd. It might have been 1,800 people in this Corn Exchange Hall, this big Victorian sort of huge cavernous building.
And was that... while we're on this, was that a win for you? I mean, is that always something that you like to see, or is that something you'll always remember, or was it just something that surprised you?
I am always trying to recreate the kind of strength that stories had when I was a child, stories that you would hear around a campfire, stories that would sort of completely terrify you and overwhelm you. And so anytime a short story can have any kind of a strong effect like that, whether it's people passing out or people weeping, I love to see 20-something people who have it so together. I love to see them start to cry, especially if they're young men. That's the kind of huge effect that I think stories can have, and completely reaffirms my choice to be a writer.
And do you think if they were reading the same story as opposed to being in a room where you're reciting it, would they have the same reaction, or is there something different with that group energy and the voice tonality or vibrations?
There are a lot of accounts of people who've been reading that particular story, and they fainted on subway platforms, or they fainted sitting in public transport. So I even saw a man standing in line at a book event waiting to get a book signed, and he was reading the story, and he fainted standing there in line. So the story seems to hold up. But for other stories, in particular, the one that tends to make people weep, I think delivery is a large part of that one.
Yeah, I honestly recall moments in my life over the past 24 years where I was reading one of your books, and I remember looking up from the book and looking around and almost feeling like, I hope no one knows what I'm reading or thinking right now. Almost like I had to look over my shoulder, as if someone was reading my mind, or even knowing what you were saying, that I might be shamed somehow.
And that's kind of the wonderful bonus of a book, is that you go into it all by yourself, and you're the only person experiencing it. And I think that's why a book can go to places that movies just can't. Movies and television and music. Well, music can be consumed alone, but everything else risks being consumed by a very large group. Yeah, books have that privacy.
And I guess when you're reading it, you can take yourself to places in your mind. Well, maybe your subconscious can know to take you places you normally wouldn't go. And those can be more terrifying than any CGI graphic Hollywood could ever create.
And also, through the abstraction of language, you can actually depict things that would overwhelm the audience if they were to see them literally made and depicted in a film, that the audience would have to walk away or shut down, leave the narrative. But language gives you so much abstraction that you can depict these things and get away with it without completely shutting down the audience.
And I've heard that you're really intentional about your language to make sure that the reader can first of all, you can convey certain emotions, but also so they don't necessarily formulate things in their mind. I think you said you don't use abstractions?
That's one of the main tenets of the style of minimalism that I was taught, is that abstractions and pejorative language, things like that, are all shortcuts, and they cheat the reader out of a more powerful experience. That, when you have a character describe another character as being 6 foot tall, then you've lost the opportunity to describe the point of view character's life and experience, and how for them another character of that size would occur. Because we never really see things in terms of, a 100-degree day, a 6 foot tall man driving 35 miles an hour. The point is to use all of those descriptive opportunities as a way of describing the point of view character's perception of the world.
And I think you've also said, if I was telling you a story, I wouldn't say, Chuck, I met this guy and he was 6 foot tall and it was 100 degrees out. I would have been like, this guy was massive and it was sweltering and I was going super fast. I mean, we wouldn't talk to each other if we were telling that story that way.
Exactly. You would particularize the language, and you would burn the language, what we call, you would misstate things, but you would misstate things in a way where the language was just your own, and it was a language that was really unique just to that story. And so the toughest part of my job is to reinvent storytelling as appropriate for every single story, whether it's a novel or a short story.
That's tricky to do.
It's exhausting. And with so much of my work is about listening to people and listening to how they burn the language, how they sort of warp and reinvent the language when they tell a story. And with the lockdown, that's become almost impossible.
Where would you go to listen to that? And would you do it on the sly, or was it just conversations with people you knew?
A lot of times it would be in groups. It would be at parties, because at parties, you're looking for people who throw out a topic, and then you're looking to see how readily people engage with the topic. At the workshop that I was running with students just before the lockdown, we were talking about a magazine store, a used bookstore that had recently closed. And someone in the group said that people who were selling their used copies, their collections of Playboy, would no longer have a place to sell them. And then somebody else said, I wonder if that's how the big box of porn in the woods happens. And everyone at the table, students from the age of 18 to 65, 70, all leaned forward and they all had a story about finding a box of porn or a duffel bag or a garbage bag of porn in the woods or in the desert or on the beach or stuffed up a tree. And they all found these things as children. And none of them had ever talked about the experience. And so finding that experience that resonates with everyone, but that no one has really openly discussed, is a big part of listening. And then listening to the language with which they finally talk about it. It's so powerful to discover that thing that everyone holds in common, but everyone thinks that they're alone in their experience of.
It's interesting how you create, Chuck, because I always assumed, and maybe this is true of a typical novelist, is they're like, I'm going to make this masterpiece and I'm going to drop it on the world and they're going to be in awe at what I created. But you seem to, I'm testing my stuff in the world. In fact, I'm mirroring the world to a certain extent and finding these things that people never knew existed. And then I'm putting my construct on it and then I'm putting it back out. But you must already be somewhat confident that there's something resonating there because, like I said, you've almost pre-road tested it.
Exactly. You've taken it to so many people and you have tested whether or not they engage with it, whether or not they have a similar experience. And then they help develop the idea, because if they have experienced something like that, then they can sort of flesh out the theme with another example, probably a better example of what I brought to them. And they can also tell me if the theme or the idea has been explored in popular culture in recent history, because you just don't want to be treading well-trod ground. And so taking it to people and sort of field testing it does that. That tests whether people engage. It develops the idea with those people's experience, and it tests whether or not the thing is worth pursuing if it's already been sort of explored already in the culture.
So parties kind of used to be your research and development lab in a way, but now that's harder to do, or it's impossible to do, because you could have those same people on a Zoom call and they might say nothing if you bring up the box of porn on a Zoom call, whereas in a group environment, you could see the cues and then it would start.
Exactly. And the other most important aspect of testing it is that, especially when I teach, the most important feedback people can get to their work is when they read it aloud and they listen to the emotional reaction, that kind of unintellectualized gasp or laugh, or that fantastic silence that indicates tension. Because after that, what they get is intellectualized academic feedback, which is almost entirely useless. What you want to hear is how the story works in front of an audience, where it lags, where it gets boring, to discover where the laughs are, where you didn't realize there was a laugh there. You need an extra time, an extra beat to allow that laugh to build, where you might be able to add a laugh after that. And so reading it and testing it in front of an audience just for their unfiltered emotional reaction is the most important aspect of that process. And on services like Zoom, it doesn't work because only one person at a time can make a noise.
It sounds more like stand-up comedy, Chuck, than what I would assume the writing process is like.
It's very similar to how you would open a show out of town.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.